Hey everyone, I want to welcome you and thank you for tuning in to our second segment of Ready Up, where we are trying to give you all the information that you need to be safe and ensure your family is safe and even your community. Today I have the honor and the privilege of sitting with Darren Allison, and I'm going to let him give you the whole list of what it is that he has done. I'm going to just let him give you his resume. So Darren, can you give us an idea of what it is that you've done and where you've been?
Absolutely, Pastor. First off, thank you for having me. And first I want to start off by saying that my family and I have been members of Liberty for about 15 years. My wife and I have 5 children and a grandson, and we love it here. This is our home. I like to say that I'm part of a larger police law enforcement family. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was a police officer. My stepfather and my wife are retired police officers. My son is a police officer.
Oh, wow.
And I served about 30 years in a major city police department in the Bay Area. Just recently retired from the department as chief of the department.
Nice.
And over my time, respond to a lot of critical incidents, a lot of emergencies, a lot of disasters that required some type of incident command. Anywhere from natural disasters to include floods and fires, all the way to human-caused events ranging from civil unrest, crowd management, widespread looting, active shooters, mass shooting incidents throughout my career. I've had an opportunity to work in a lot of different roles and responsibilities within the department. I spent well over 10 years in our Special Operations Division, was the SWAT team commander for a very long time. I was an instructor within the department for incident command systems, critical infrastructure protection, vulnerability assessments, leadership development. I taught crowd management for a long, long time. In fact, with crowd management, I was recognized throughout the United States as a subject matter expert and presented all throughout the country, as well as wrote an article on crowd management for one of our police journals, and helped develop best practices for the state through our police officers' standards and training. I've attended a lot of training throughout my career, graduate of the FBI National Academy, as well as our Senior Management Institute for Police, and still, even in retirement, maintain affiliations with some organizations, including Major City Chiefs, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and currently serve on an ICP committee. So definitely a long history of policing in my family and in my professional career.
Yeah, you have some experience.
A little bit.
So you did say something that I want to touch on, because I think that this is the crux of this specific video. We wanted to really see if we could hone in on civil unrest.
Sure.
What do we do? How do we prepare? What does that look like? And so I just kind of wanted to ask you just a few questions. From your point of view as law enforcement and all of your experience, how do we prepare ourselves for a potential of civil unrest? One of the things that we have said during these video series is if you get ready and stay ready, you don't have to worry. There's no problem with you rushing around and trying to get things taken care of. So if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Right.
So what would be your advice in what should our first steps be in getting ready for a potential civil unrest?
So the principles of civil unrest and what community can do kind of link into what you can do for any major event or emergency that could happen, whether it's, again, natural disaster or a human-led event. And that is stay informed. Be plugged into information that can be pushed out from your local government, from your law enforcement professionals, from fire, from medical. So there are apps like Nixle alerts or Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. Law enforcement and public safety and first responders use those platforms to inform the public of what is occurring, what could occur, and what you can do in the event those things transpire. Those apps and those ways of communication also give you information on evacuation areas, block traffic, areas to avoid or stay away from, because the best preparation for civil unrest that could happen fairly quickly and fairly spontaneously, you need to know where to not be and to avoid those areas so you don't get wrapped up in it. So that's one, stay informed And the feedback loop works both ways. If you see something, maybe if you see individuals gathering and they're maybe creating some challenges or problems, blocking the street, or maybe vandalizing, you want to report to the police department, and it's that see something, say something rule. So they are informed and they can respond as quickly as possible. The second approach after being informed is have a plan. So, and this is what this message is good for us, to start thinking in advance. If this happens, what do I do next? So I mentioned evacuation. How do I get out of the area? If I see a demonstration coming or a protest coming, how do I move away from that location? If you're already, say, in the church or you're in a building, the best thing to do if they're not entering the building is to shelter in place, stay put. Don't go out because a lot of civil unrest demonstrations can be highly emotional, highly charged, and what you don't want to do is get caught up into that level of emotion.
Okay.
If you are in an area and maybe the demonstration is coming in and there's a way to egress out or evacuate out, then know your evacuation points in advance. You know, when I go to any venue, whether it's a movie theater or whatever it is, a restaurant, I'm constantly looking, where's the back door, where the side entrance is, how do I, if I have to leave, where do I go? So having that pre-planned in your mind. Having rally points if your family gets separated. If we leave, where are we going to meet up at? We're going to meet up across the street or over at the gas station or at our aunt's house, whatever the case may be. Have a rally point and have that pre-planned out. In the event that you do get caught up into a crowd or you're within the crowd, have a plan on how do you extract yourself out, find a safe area to, if you can't get out, go into to shelter in place, and at all costs avoid getting into a debate or a dialogue or a physical confrontation with protesters or demonstrators. I'll tell you, in my career, most demonstrations are nonviolent. They certainly have a freedom to express and freedom of speech. They can be, they could be inconvenient. They can cause a lot of disruption. But there tend to be sometimes actors or individuals that come in and infiltrate the crowd that aren't really there for the message. They're just there to cause damage. And again, you want to avoid those individuals, get out and call the police as soon as you can so they can intervene. Third point is, and this again applies for larger incidents as well as even civil unrest, if you have to evacuate out of an area, maybe it's in your neighborhood or maybe it's an area that you have to move away from, make sure you have a little kit that you can take with you. It's important for natural disasters because you got to have sustainment for days on end. Minimum 3 days, could be up to 7 days, but you want to be able to take important documents, important medical supplies, things that you need to sustain if you have to evacuate from an area for a long period of time. And then fourth, and I think sometimes is forgotten, is be available to assist those that are vulnerable around you. When it comes to any kind of disaster or emergency or civil unrest, what you're going through, what you're feeling, if you have a plan, you can reduce the fear and the chaos. But some individuals who need more assistance may not have a plan, and you can help reduce any conflict. If you see somebody from our vulnerable community or somebody that needs a little bit more help them along and help them out to assist them in that time of need. And one key thing, and this goes for any disaster, but I think it's also important for civil unrest, is you have to listen to the information being put out, particularly by law enforcement. If they tell you don't go into an area, don't go. If it's a road closure, don't try to drive through that road closure or you can get locked in. I've seen too many times protests take over freeways where individuals are now stuck in traffic and they're trying to get to the hospital or their wife is in labor and they're having a baby. So you have to pay attention. It goes back to the first point of staying informed, but just listen to the police, and if they tell you to clear an area, clear the area, because what they're doing now is giving usually a dispersal order to disperse the event altogether, and they're going to either start making arrests or clear the crowd.
Okay, that's some super good information. I want to delve deeper on a couple of things, but we want to reiterate, because we reiterated this in our first video too, the go bag or the bag with your documents and medications and all that is super important. You can do that now
100%.
And just put that somewhere where, because the whole idea the whole idea about the bug out bag or the go bag is to be able to grab it and go. So you could be doing that right now. And it is our reasonable service. I just want to bring this into it. This is our reasonable service to help those who need help.
Absolutely.
So I know that it's an emergency. I know that you have your families, but just kind of be visual, kind of be intentional about making sure your neighbors are okay and whoever else might need assistance. You mentioned that in case of an emergency, make sure you stay tuned in, dialed in, and law enforcement uses different platforms, different apps. What if we don't have service? What is our next step?
Absolutely. So there's a part of having the plan is having different alternative communication methods. Certainly if phone lines are down, texting or calling can be a challenge. Part of being prepared is, especially in your residence, having a generator that can produce secondary power, having a portable radio with batteries, because we do put out alerts over radio broadcasts. That's things that we in law enforcement always contemplate how we can communicate to the general public. Even in our emergency operations area, we'd have ham radio operators just in case we'd need backup communication systems. Satellite phones are always another option that it could be available, two-way radio communication, but really trying to get the information through alternative means that aren't going to rely on the power source of your house or your organization. If you are in an organization, you always contemplate the what-if scenarios, but say you are having service and there's an event outside and the power goes out. We build in security layers of security teams, either volunteer security or even hire professional security personnel. They should be the points of contact to what's going on outside, whether it's making contact to law enforcement that's already responded or to maybe the liaison or coordinator of a demonstration. A lot of them will have spokespersons or liaisons. Some of them will have the National Lawyers Guild or representatives that you can contact and say, hey, are they staying here? Are they moving on? Where you can establish communication. But always designate a point of contact or person that can make contact. And that's for civil unrest. If it becomes more criminal in nature, where you're seeing rioting or looting, obviously you're not going to make contact. You're going to figure out, again, a way that we can either shelter in place and lock down the organization or egress out to a rally point or a place where you can meet and make sure and account for everybody's safety. And then trying to establish communications. It could be somebody, all right, we're going to stay here. We're going to have somebody get in a car and drive to the local department or establish contact verbally. But you start planning and getting creative of how can we overcome the setback from having power outage or phone lines down and not having planned enough to have alternative communication equipment in advance. So you could, but having those rally points and just say, hey, we're going to sit tight and I will go out and I'll come back. And we've done things where drilled things where I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to take me half an hour. And if I'm not back in a half an hour, then we need to start, putting a search and rescue team together. But, you kind of get creative, like who's going to be the point of contact that's going out and make contact with services and resources. And this can get beyond civil unrest. There's other things you got to think about, like, flooding or earthquakes or buildings that have collapsed, and how do you move and how do you navigate? Sometimes you won't communicate and you can't move, and so you got to figure out how do you signal for assistance or help. Some people have flares, some people have ways to paint, on their rooftops. You've seen that in Katrina when there was massive flooding. So you just got to figure out, how do I express? If this road is blocked, then what other alternative means to communicate do I have?
And that's something that we should be thinking about now, not waiting until the event happens. I also wanted to interject and say that Darren is actively working with Liberty and our security team in keeping us safe, what we need to do, what our building needs to look like. So he's actively working. So I just wanted to interject that that if you are here and something happens, that we have some plans in place. So I wanted to interject that. The other thing I wanted to ask, and maybe I'll ask this at the end, I kind of want to say we want to live vicariously through you. So civil unrest happens. What do you do with your family?
So for my family, my kids, obviously I have a lot of kids, I'll tell them stay home. This is not the night to go out if it's happening. And we saw that a few years ago. Even Fairfield had impacts of civil unrest. The jurisdiction I was policing in had a lot of impact from civil unrest. For me, that's just not the night to go out and go to the store or what have you. A lot of the times when we see civil unrest issues, law enforcement is responding. If the incident may be larger than the local jurisdiction can handle, they will look to what we call a mutual aid response. So they'll contact the county or the state. The county usually is the mutual aid coordinator to bring in additional law enforcement resources. And their goal ultimately is public safety, maintaining peace and order, and securing areas that have been impacted with the whole goal to returning to normalcy. And so there's a lot of tactics and techniques that law enforcement use to try and bring civil unrest into control and manageable, so it's not a danger to community. So knowing that there's going to be individuals that could be engaged in civil unrest, and knowing that law enforcement is going to be using tools and tactics to address it, keeping my family in for the night is not a bad thing, because again, groups can move quickly, they can take over areas fast, there's a lot of emotion, there are actors that don't care about the issues but want to disrupt, and being trapped in that could be a very scary thing. And if you're not prepared, if you're not paying attention, if the apps aren't working or things are down and you're out traveling, you can get quickly caught up into it. And I've seen videos, I've witnessed firsthand individuals being assaulted, cars being tipped over, lit on fire, buses being taken over during civil unrest where they're caught inside a group of individuals that are intent on doing harm. But from a policing perspective, as I mentioned, trying to preserve the peace, a lot of the times what they're going to do, especially when they show up to, just say a demonstration, it's not a full-on riot, but it's a demonstration. As I mentioned, individuals have the First Amendment right of freedom of speech and assembly and to address their grievances. And so what we'll try and do is facilitate that, even if it means closing some part of the road. So if they want to march or they want to move, and a lot of that will involve making contact with the liaison or the primary organizer of the demonstration or march. So we can figure out, how can we assist? How can we help you exercise your freedom of speech and your First Amendment rights without causing a large-scale disruption or harm to the community? And that tends to work out pretty well, and then we facilitate it, and oftentimes they disperse peacefully and there are no issues. If there are individuals that are committing crimes or disrupting, we do have techniques and tactics on how to identify and arrest those individuals. Because even with the freedoms that you have, there is no freedom to commit crime and harm community. And at least in our department and in the law enforcement agencies that I've partnered with, they're intent on making sure that crimes aren't committed and making those arrests. If the crowd becomes unlawful for whatever that reason, maybe we use a standard called time, place, and manner, that it's not conducive to continue the demonstration, or the crimes are getting so out of control it's presenting a public safety risk, we'll issue dispersal orders. And if individuals don't disperse, it becomes then an unlawful assembly that you can also be subject to arrest. So you tend to see that, how can we facilitate, how can we negotiate? If it becomes problematic, we'll announce, we'll disperse, and then we'll move into an arrest posture to try and bring order to the city.
Okay, because there is such a thing as professional antagonizers who come from all over the world, all over the United States, I should say, and they are not interested in what's going on. They're just there specifically to cause escalation. So we do want to stay out of those things. I think it's excellent that you said stay in place. Like, if you're safe there and nothing is happening, just stay where you are. Which leads me to my next question is, what in these cases can the citizen expect from the police department? You guys are hecka busy, everything's going on. What should we expect? We're flooding 911. Like, what would be your advice regarding the expectation of law enforcement during civil unrest?
So when it comes to law enforcement and civil unrest, and any emergency for that matter, it can stretch law enforcement capacity. It's not uncommon for planned events for departments to cancel their days off, cancel vacation, and make sure that the departments are at maximum capacity. They also weigh the ability to respond to the incident and other emergency services. So as I mentioned, they could request mutual aid, mutual assistance from surrounding law enforcement agencies to bring capacity up to not only address and meet the emergency at hand, but to still provide basic 911 emergency services for other issues. In cities where there might be a wildfire, where you might see looting or civil unrest issue, there's still other parts of the city, county, and even the state, if it's a larger statewide issue, that are having other day-to-day emergencies, whether they're domestic violence or shooting incidents or other assaults or the burglaries, that you need to be available to respond to, priority one, serious emergencies. And so we have to have capacity to not only address and meet the emergency, but organizations and chiefs, they always look at, do we have enough capacity to serve the remainder of the service requirements the community needs from its police services. We also need to make sure that we have our investigators in play. The incident that happens isn't just localized to the actual emergency. There could be prosecutions that are the aftermath. There could be investigations, documentation. All that plays a role, and even the after action. In our department, whenever we had a large-scale event, we would have an investigative team come in. We'd make sure our actions were documented. If there was crimes, that the crimes were documented, that they were thoroughly investigated. And we would hold also town halls and after-action reviews to show, what we did, how we responded, what we could do better, manage expectations. So I know a lot of departments do that, and you can expect that from a service department that wants to make sure they're serving their community properly. But there's also a whole host of other actions that law enforcement takes in an event. So say again, crowd management, they're trying to manage the crowd, make sure crimes are addressed, but they're also looking for opportunities to support any kind of medical conditions, whether somebody's hurt during the crowd event or goes into medical crisis. So, working with our paramedics, our fire departments to ensure that we're bringing in medical attention to individuals that can't move or extracting individuals that need to be pulled out of a crowd to seek medical attention. We work with our fire teams if there is a arson incident or a fire incident on how we can safely bring our fire teams in to put out fires so that doesn't get out of control. We look and try and create evacuation routes, create traffic safety plans. So, again, not everybody can stay home. Maybe they have to go to work. Maybe they have to get to the doctor. So we want to make sure that not only we manage the crowd, we're controlling surrounding traffic so people can get around, at least somewhat mobile, to take care of essential business. So there are a lot of nuances that go on to not just manage the crowd, but everything else that happens in the city around the crowd.
Right. So I think it's important to say, because of what I hear you saying, correct me if I'm mistaken, what I hear you saying is that if calls come in or when calls come in to 911 dispatch, that they are triaging the calls. So the things that are important, like if you have to get to the hospital, if there's some life or death situation, so in conjunction with what they're doing as far as like crowd management and making sure that there are no illegal things taking place, they'll triage those calls as they come in.
That's correct, and I think you bring up a very important point, is because the city continues to function and people continue to experience crime concerns outside of the event, and even interested in the event, they tend to call 911. So one of the biggest things I can emphasize is, yes, we will still take 911 calls, but really people need to be thoughtful about managing what they're calling the police about to ensure that we don't overload, because the system can get overloaded, and we only have capacity for enough dispatchers to manage those phone lines. And so you could incur some wait times if you're calling the police and the phone lines are being overloaded. But try and manage expectations that you just got to be patient. To call the police department for serious emergencies, and so we can again manage the phone lines so those that really need help can get through to a dispatcher and can get the help that they need.
Absolutely. So that's important, really, to manage your expectation. That's really a great statement, because everything is an emergency to the person that it is happening to. But you have to understand that there's protocols that say, it's kind of like going to the doctor. They're going to take someone who's having heart issues over someone who needs stitches. So just manage the expectation and have some grace with them, because they are fielding a insurmountable amount of phone calls. So just have some grace in that area.
I'll tell you, to give you an example, our dispatch center in the agency I worked for, 1 year serviced well over 1 million phone calls into the dispatch center. 1 million calls. And, at any given time, you have a handful of dispatchers trying to field those calls.
Right.
So I have a lot of respect for our dispatchers out there who work very, very hard to be professional, to have an ear for folks that need help or in crisis or just calling for some guidance. So again, understanding that there's capacity limits, but certainly if you're in an emergency,
make sure you call. Right. So my next question would be, how do we prepare our homes?
Absolutely. When an emergency happens, whether it's, again, a crowd event or a natural disaster, there's a lot of stress, a lot of tension, in some cases desperation, maybe it's limited resources. And so having a plan in place, having advanced preparation can help kind of sift through that type of chaos. Again, planning in advance on if something comes to my front door, whether it's my home, my organization, understanding what will it take to shelter in place, to lock down the premises, when to evac, where to evac. I always recommend having 2 points of evacuation. to your point earlier, communication. How do we communicate? Phone lines are down. How do we get information out? Do we have a backup generator? Do we have two-way radios to at least communicate around the perimeter of our location? Do we have ways of reaching out to the outside world? So making sure you have that on site. Meeting points, establishing meeting points, and having a way to communicate, if there's a way to communicate outside of the impacted jurisdiction. So having a relative, another county, another state, where you can account for, hey, everybody, if you're separated and you want to know if we're okay, check in with our grandma who lives over here, cousin who lives over there, friend of the family, because they serve as, again, a rally point and a point of communication. Part of emergencies is I can't find my loved one who lives with me or stays with me, and I'm in a panic now trying to find them. So if it's, hey, at all costs, if you can't call into our house because our phone lines are down, but you happen to be near a computer near an outside jurisdiction, post on Facebook to your auntie or whatever that, hey, we're here, and if we establish communication, we'll check in with him or her, if we can't physically get to each other. So always having an outside source. Having your family trained in first aid and CPR. And I know here at Liberty, we have medical staff here to help with emergent medical conditions. I think it's very important because if you think about an emergency, whether it's civil unrest or what have you, you could be cut off from people getting to you right away or transportation routes. And so having individuals that know basic CPR and first aid that can provide those services are important. I mentioned the generator, but having fire extinguishers on site, making sure your home has its basic security protections, video cameras, alarm system, lighting features. Not every event will shut off power, so having those things to harden, we call hardening the target in our infrastructure protection language, that can harden the target to make it less optimal for either burglary or other criminal issues is always essential. And then again, just pay attention to the information coming in, whether it's through the social sites, the news feeds, and just avoid those areas. And if you do have to evacuate, as you've prepared your home and now you have your kit, your emergency kit, and you have to leave, just make sure you stay away from zones, again, that are impacted zones from whatever the emergency is occurring, and wait for the all clear from your local authorities to get back into the area. Okay. So those are some things about how do you get your mind around, how do you prepare, and what to think about should those incidents happen. So
some really basic things. Should they stay away from windows? Should they shelter in place in one room altogether?
Particularly for civil unrest, most of the time, especially if they go to a residential neighborhood, they're not really messing with the homes. Or if they're going to march, they're going to march through. But it's still a good idea to stay away from, lock your doors, lock your windows, stay away from the windows in case there's an object that's thrown and you don't want to get glass on your person, and kind of stay back. But 9 times out of 10, they're passing through and they're leaving the area. One of the things you got to think about when it comes to civil unrest is they're trying to express their grievances, usually to the government or to the person that they feel have caused those grievances. And so going through residential neighborhoods and creating problems in residences doesn't also rally a lot of support for their cause.
That makes sense.
It can cause, significant home disruption, and so they're really trying to go to areas of government, areas of businesses, areas where, their voice can actually be heard and televised. But if those events should occur, locking your doors, staying back is always a good thing. And to the earlier point, just shelter in place and it'll pass through.
So I want to ask 2 kind of controversial questions.
Absolutely.
So the one will be, and I'll give you both of them.
Okay.
The one would be self-defense. And the other one is, what do we do in an active shooter situation?
All right, so first question, when it comes to self-defense, like preparing for emergencies or disasters or serious incidents, preparing your home and it starts before the actual incident occurs where you need self-defense. Everything I mentioned earlier about protecting yourself, protecting your family still holds true. I think that another layer is, protecting your neighborhood is important. So getting to know your neighbors, being part of a neighborhood watch program, having a good neighborhood network so you can communicate. So if they see conflict or issues occurring in your home, they can be your advocates on your behalf. Maybe you can't get to a phone to call the police. Maybe you can't bring in help, but they know you and they see what's going on, they can call on your behalf. So having that network is key. From personal protection standpoint, the best advice is always to not be in the area where the conflict is. This is
Right.
the best defense, is
Right.
not to be there so you don't have to experience that. If you're preparing for a situation where maybe you don't have that opportunity, I always suggest, there are training environments that law enforcement puts on, as well as other agencies, to teach you personal protection techniques, how to de-escalate if you do have that conflict, how to address something in a nonviolent manner. Also, how to give you basic physical techniques on how to protect yourself and then move away or run away to create distance. I mean, that's what you really want to do, is stop wherever the threat is and create distance. They even teach you on how to use impromptu weapons, if you're going to use your keys or use object in your hand to defend yourself and get away. Our goal is to never be put in that situation. Obviously, we can't control everything. And so having some level of training that's provided to you, you don't have to be an expert in martial arts, but if you have basic techniques to protect yourself and get away, that's always optimal. And then certainly call the police and call for help. Part of the kit that we recommend, and it's also something that you keep on your person, is a device that makes noise, whether it's a little alarm or a whistle, something where it's going to alert attention, to bring support towards you, again, to protect yourself and get away. Again, the goal is that physical separation. Don't be there in the first place. If you're there, you got to do what you need to do, proportionate to what the threat is you're facing, the bodily harm you're facing, and then move away. So that's the best advice in preparation for self-defense.
Can you give us, because you said proportion to what it is, can you give us an example of that?
So, when it comes to knowing, whether it's the civil litigation side or the legal side, when it comes to what kind of force can I use to protect myself, the standard is using force to prevent immediate bodily injury. In some cases, and you see this for either law enforcement or for security personnel who might be armed with a weapon, the threshold's even higher, is to defend yourself against immediate death or great bodily injury. And so there's a standard of when you can use force on somebody to make sure it's justified versus in an assault or a battery. And so, if you are, the best example I can have is somebody is pushing you, you're not going to use a weapon to assault them
And you
back.
shouldn't shoot them.
Yes, it's got to be proportional. And so, I know that seems super technical. That's why the issue is if you're being assaulted, to basically defend yourself and get away, that stops the violent encounter. And so that's kind of what I mean by the proportionality.
That makes sense. So the active shooter situation.
So the active shooter, unfortunately in our country, we've seen a lot of active shooting incidents. Some are in organizations. Some, sadly, are in neighborhoods where multiple people are shot for either a rival gang feud or some drug scenario. But the principles always apply for individuals who might be put in that situation. The first principle is to run. Again, it goes back to the personal protection. Get away. If you can get away, have pre-planned ways of getting out of there. If you hear an active shooter, move away from the gunfire. Get away from the gunfire and get out of the area. Sometimes you may not be able to run. The second principle is to hide. Find a place to lock yourself into that cannot be accessed from outside. Turn off the lights, silence your phones, cover the windows, move away from the windows. If you can get under a desk or a table, barricade the door, just hide and lock yourself in so people can't get to you. And if running is not feasible, if hiding is not, you're not able to hide anywhere, then fighting. Fighting with all conviction and certainty as hard as you can to stop the threat and stop the shooting and protect yourself. And oftentimes that fighting can even involve multiple people doing an assault or trying to restrain the individual, stop the individual at one time. So the run, hide, fight are the three principles on if the unfortunate scenario of an active shooter were to occur.
And when we say fight with, he said, with everything that you have and with anything around you.
That's correct.
Fight with anything that you can.
Weapons,
get away.
You can grab, fight for your life.
Absolutely. Okay, I think that the only other question I have, and then I'm just going to allow you to, I only know in part you obviously have a list of qualifications, and so at the end I'll let you speak on anything that you think is super important for everyone to know. But my last thing is, how do we know what our emergency plans are for our county and our city? As far as the emergency plan for Liberty, one of the things that you said, let me just backtrack a little bit, but one of the things that you said was run. And I believe in the run, hide, fight. I believe that. Listen to the people who are in charge. If something are going on at Liberty, we will have people like Darren and other people directing you and guiding you in what to do. It's important that you don't run hysterically, but that you run with purpose and that you're listening to the people who can direct you to safety. So let me say that. But also, how do we know the plans? Like Liberty, we will make sure that you know the plans, but how do I know the plans for Fairfield and Vacaville and Solano County or Vallejo? How do we know the emergency plans for our area?
That's a great question. And, when you go back to even as far back to 9/11, and trying to figure out how do we ramp up infrastructure protection and protecting our communities, a lot of federal agencies, state agencies emerged and started codifying plans on how to respond. So of course there are national plans, and you can go to their websites and look up these plans. Some of them are exceptionally long, but FEMA, or Federal Emergency Management Agency, has plans. Department of Homeland Security has plans. For the state, California Office of Emergency Services has a statewide plan when it comes to disasters and terrorist-style events and large-scale criminal activities. Fairfield Emergency, if you go to their website, they not only have the Fairfield plan on what to do in the event of an earthquake or a fire or some type of disaster, but they also have links to other resources. I mentioned earlier the Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT, that you can volunteer for, or Citizen Corps. You can find out, how do I get involved? As part of your own also personal protection, not only do I get involved with volunteering during emergencies, but I get some training that can bring me back to my community, back to my home, and I can help support emergency workers in a disaster who actually will need every hand they can and every help they can get. Solano County has the Solano County Office of Emergency Services as well. They also offer Alert Solano, where you can get alerts on disasters. Again, they have plans with appendices on different specific issues that may occur in our communities, what the risks are, because I think it's part of being informed is knowing what the risks are, because it can help you prepare, and then what will happen in the event of the disaster, and really what the continuity of operation, we always call it a coup plan. What are the continuity of operation? How do we keep the community, the businesses, the government, and the needs that people have sustained? We saw it and struggle with it through the pandemic. How do we bring services, because people need food, they need medicine, they need clothes, they need ability to survive. And so all those ways of doing that, distributing resources and supplies, are in those plans. So if you want to look at, you go to those websites, you can actually download them for public access. Some of them are many, many pages long, but it does add to the preparedness that you need. And I think that there needs to be a hook into all those plans. So knowing what the city's role is with the county's role is with the state. Same for an organization. What is our role within the city? Knowing what the city may activate, how can we assist, as a community, as a church, as an organization? How can we be part of the emergency response? Distribution of supplies, being a distribution point, place for prayer and help and comfort. So all those, we all have that role, and knowing that plan, you can also know how we fit in to support our larger community. Because if we do come together, we can return to normalcy quickly, and we also exercise great resiliency when we come together. And I think that's super, super important, knowing the plans and knowing how we all fit in together.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's some really good information. So the websites for the county and for your city and state and beyond, you can just go to those and get the information. And I think that, this might be common knowledge, but I think it's worth really reiterating that all of this disaster preparedness, these pre-plans, it's before. Like we can't afford to wait until the situations happen to try to inform and educate ourselves. It's got to be a pre, so we have to do things in advance in order to make sure that we're safe, our families are safe, and our communities are safe.
And Pastor, if I can add to that, plans are super important, don't get me wrong, but I've also seen many, many times where plans are written and they sit on the shelf, they don't get read, and they don't get trained and exercised. And so, when it comes to, we mentioned active shooter, or when it comes to even earthquake drills or fire drills, whatever the case, or evacuation. You mentioned earlier about listening to your leadership. Practicing it, taking a day where, you know what, we're going to have a bunch of people volunteer. We're just going to do a drill. We're going to drill, 4 times a year or once, twice a year, because the important piece is your body can't go where your mind hasn't been.
That's right.
And if you haven't practiced it, if you haven't rehearsed it, sometimes people can get overcome by fear, overcome by the events, and they might know the plan, but they freeze because they haven't worked through that fear. And so, one of the things I'm working with Liberty is, how do we codify those plans, how we update those plans, and how we practice those plans. We have a great team of security professionals that work at Liberty who I've had the pleasure of meeting and getting to know. And working together is just going to make our security that much tighter and that much safer for our congregations. So I'm really excited about those opportunities.
Yeah, and that's why we're doing these videos too, because we could do a manual that will sit on the shelf of 600 pages and nobody's updating it and nobody's reading it. But we feel like we really want to get this information. This is a platform where you can just watch it over and over and over again until, you have that depth of understanding. I believe sincerely that we do have to practice. We do have to run through things. So I know that some of our security team with you are working towards that, and so that's excellent. I think that I'm honored to have been able to speak to you in such depth of this, and I really hope that we're hearing, even with our first video, and if you haven't seen that, I want to encourage you to go back and take a look at that. That was regarding fire, which California is known for their fires. We have several segments that are coming up, and so we want you to stay linked in because your safety is of the utmost importance to us. So before we leave, is there anything else that you would like to add to this before we close?
Well, it's been great talking to you, and certainly not only being a longtime member here, I'm making myself available to just continuing discussion. We've just scratched the surface. I know in the last 30 minutes or so that we've been talking, there's so much more depth that we certainly can cover. I know there'll be more conversations and more training. But I think if people stay informed, pay attention, listen to authorities, have that plan, prepare, and there's a lot more information you can find on all of our government sites and at Fairfield PD sites. Have that go bag that you talked about, that kit is super important. I can't stress that enough. And again, being there to help one another. And know this, your church, your first responders, your medical, your fire, your police professionals care deeply about their community, and they're here to keep you safe and to respond and to make sure that you can return to life and live, thrive, and just work and love as free as you can in this community. So we're definitely dedicated, and you're in great hands. Awesome.
And I just want to end by saying this is a participatory relationship. So we can't put it all on the different departments. We have to be active ourselves. We have to be active in preparing, active in reading, active in all of these scenarios. He gave you some ideas of what it is that you could do. So let's do those things, because once again, if you get ready and stay ready, you'll be safe. Absolutely. If you don't stay ready, if you don't get ready, then you're doing something at the spur of the moment and it might not be effective. We will be having several more segments of this, and our hope is to have the ability for you all to ask any questions or dive a little bit deeper into this. But these are just some things to scratch the surface to get you to thinking, what can I do to prepare my house, my family, and am I doing all that I can do right now? So we want to thank you again. We want to thank you for coming, and we want to thank you for tuning in. And remember, it's all about being ready. So thank you for tuning in to Ready Up. We hope to see you next segment. God bless you.